Not much to say well, I'll walk up here. As Tim was talking about those trips out on the ocean, I got excited. I always go out there. I was a student when I went out on one many years ago, and I was just talking to these kiddos that are doing the setup for the Audubon Society, and I was like, "Hey, you guys want to go to sea? Go see some whales?" And they were like, "Yeah, I'm in. I'm into science." So, what a great program. Yeah, there were what, how many final count for 14 northern fur seals. That's the most we've ever seen in one trip. Yeah, that was unusual. And the humpbacks. And then the humpbacks and the city shearwaters, and the water was kind of reddish brown. And Tim's like, grab some of that. There was obviously fish, and then there was plankton. So we pulled the plankton, came back here and looked at the plankton on the computer, and there was some really cool stuff. And it was dense, with lots of critters, plankton, and all that. Anyway, big things to small things to lead to big things. Enough. Through the Purple Martin in an Audubon meeting in Danarola, I got myself into trouble years ago. Pam said, no, don't do it. And I did the Purple Martin study for Danarola in 2009, did it again in this past year. And then he introduced me to Elizabeth Meisman. And we went around and talked about cool stuff. We have so many ospreys. We have so many people that know the nests around their homes. So this is something that we can all participate in. And Elizabeth Meisman is a student. She did her undergrad at Humboldt State. She's also in the master's program up there. And I think that's enough from us. And I'm going to hand this over. It's an honor to introduce Lizzie. Thank you.
Okay, with this one, I turned the other one off. Okay, I want to make sure everybody can hear me, so don't be shy in the back of like raising your hand if it gets a little weak, okay? We're good right now? Thank you for that warm introduction, Sarah. I am so grateful to be here. I love where you all live. I'm also a North Coaster, but I'm based in Eureka, and have been for the last 15 years. And I'm really excited to talk to you tonight about osprey, which are really near and dear to my heart. And I've been really grateful to connect with people like Sarah, who have such a wealth of knowledge about where our local birds are nesting. So stick around. There's business cards and such if you want to reach out to me afterwards too, on the back table. So I want to get into this and really emphasize that this is a large team effort. This is a passion project that my husband and I started, but with a lot of mentorship and support from people like my mentor, Dr. Pete Bloom, and Mike Van Haddam with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, as well as Katie Rion, and some great students who have worked alongside me. Last year, we had Nick Abler and Vanessa Ramirez, and I've got a really stellar summer intern who's out there checking nests right now, or she's done for the day, but you know what I mean. So I wanted to start by providing a background about Osprey. I'm sure you guys know a lot of this already, but I want to convince you that they're really cool. So they're worldwide and primarily migratory. And so you're going to see here the orange is their breeding range, and the blue is non-breeding. And they're really uniquely evolved from the rest of raptors, and they're in their own family. They are known to only eat fish, pretty much, but they have such an adaptability to eating freshwater species as well as saltwater. And so they're found in proximity to different water features. And y'all are bird lovers, so you probably know this too, but I wanted to provide a brief overview to help you identify them. They're very large. They're here in the middle, and they have this notable dihedral sort of M shape to their wings, where you can see that arch. And if you get a closer look, you might even be able to tell what sex they are. The females tend to have a bit of a necklace on their breast with like more of those brown flecking. It's not a perfect thing, but yeah, which one do you think? And if you see them perched next to each other, the females are larger in raptors. And they have all of these amazing adaptations to be great fishers. So these amazing strong talons that allow them to have a vice-like grip on fish as they're hunting, but also on the tops of tree branches as they're blowing in the wind. And they even can close their nostrils as they dive underwater. And in terms of their conservation history, they had a very dramatic decline across North America, in particular, following the use of DDT, which was a pesticide, as well as PCBs from around the 1940s through the 1970s. And Dr. Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, shed light onto how horrible that chemical DDT was affecting birds. You might have heard this more with bald eagles and peregrines, but it was also affecting ospreys, in part because of this eggshell thinning. So the eggs would literally collapse when the parents were trying to incubate them. Fortunately, that awareness led to the banning of DDT in 1972, and we, across the US, there's really rigorous monitoring from the 80s through the 90s documenting their recovery. So from like around 8,000 pairs in 1981 to probably at the upper end of 20,000 across the US in 2001. So this is an awesome conservation success story. But unfortunately, with that, the survey efforts and monitoring and research has really diminished in most places after that. And um, so there are a lot of wonderful people who've done a lot of research on ospreys, and we might ask, like, why still study them? Because I love them, one personal thing, but they have a really powerful opportunity for us to understand a bigger watershed and ecosystem health because they are a sentinel species. And this is similar to an indicator species where it's really a species that can shed light into chemical exposure, pollution, and they are perfect for that because they eat aquatic food and they're positioned high up in the food web. And then also, they're so widespread across many different habitats that we can get a good indication of some of those potential issues. And where I'm based in Humboldt Bay, it's the second largest estuary in California. So lots of osprey habitat and across Northern California too. And ospreys are easily studied because they're often in our human-altered landscapes. And many of them are using nesting platforms because that was a major tool used in their conservation recovery. Similarly, they have this loyalty to home where they come back to the same nesting area year after year. And so also as researchers, we can look at that and see the occupancy over time as another valuable data. So all of that, having lived on the North Coast and done all sorts of types of osprey surveys for different employers, such as timber companies and wildlife surveys, Forest Service, I knew where a bunch of the osprey nests were, and I have had the great fortune of working on a research project in Idaho for the past decade. So I've dug deeper and deeper and realized, oh, very few people are looking at ospreys, and we don't really know anything very much about them currently. So I sought to establish the North Coast Osprey Project, which we would like to be a long-term project focused on the breeding population around Humboldt Bay. And last year I hired some students and we had a great group of people helping, and we monitored about 35 nests. For those of you who haven't been to Humboldt Bay, I highly encourage you to come visit. It's great for birding, in particular on migration. If you've heard of the Godwit Days Spring Bird Migration Festival, yeah, I get a lot of nods. That's a great one. And the Arcata Marsh is actually right up here, if you can see my mouse, on the north side of this North Bay. But this area is probably really good for ospreys because it's a nursery habitat for many, many different species of fish. So lots of good foraging. And we are collaborating with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, who has been intermittently monitoring some of these nests all the way back to 2014. And we really are trying to figure out what nests are used or occupied each year and whether they have babies, and whether those young survive. So these are some of my students last year, but it really takes a lot of effort going out, trying to play bird detective, figuring out where the birds are nesting that given year, and then being patient and watching and seeing if they have babies and how many. We also have the great fortune of working with PG&E to gain access to some of these nests because the Osprey are capitalizing on a lot of those nest platforms on the PG&E infrastructure. And so we were able to access and band the very first osprey in Humboldt that we have in our data. And so last year we banded just 10 nestlings at 7 nests. But this is so special, even though it's only a small number, we're just getting started. And every time that we as researchers can get our hands on a wild critter, we have the opportunity to learn a tremendous amount about these animals. For instance, we can look at the health. We can take things like genetic samples to look at how related our ospreys are. And then we put color bands on their legs. So if you look here and you see the Y3, that is pretty big. And so if we as birders are able to watch a bird after it leaves the nest and is flying, we can see who this bird is if they're cooperative and we get a good view of their legs and actually figure out who the individual is without having to recatch them. And so ospreys are long-lived, and we have the opportunity to potentially observe this bird year over year using that color band without ever having to capture it again. And we can look at how far away they go, all sorts of things. And, so the birding community is a wonderful resource for band resites because we're more eyes and ears and everything in the field. But we learn a lot just by, especially from the young birds and seeing where they go. So last year, just focused on Humboldt Bay, we monitored 34 nests, found about 23 of them that were active. But only 14 of them were successful. But this is just a snapshot in time, and there hasn't been a lot of research actually since 1971, aside from this senior project that was done by my friend Patty Torres, who is now working on her PhD at the University of Georgia. But she did her senior project as an undergrad studying some of the nests around Humboldt Bay. And so this is our only other reference point where there were 10 nests. And we have a similar number of young per population, but in contrast, in 2015, she had about 90% nest success, whereas last year we had just 61. So I, having been part in particular of this research project I mentioned in Idaho, I'm concerned about that unusually low nest success. But it's just 1 year. And so this also is a reminder for any long-lived species of the importance of long-term monitoring to get a good baseline year over year. But I've had the opportunity as a young scientist to go to conferences and connect with other osprey researchers. And I've heard concerning reports from folks studying osprey on the East Coast, both from the Virginia portion of the Delmarva Peninsula and Chesapeake Bay. So this is Delmarva, and they did really intensive surveys in the 80s. On the left-hand side is 1987, where they had a whole bunch of osprey nests. And in 2025, they've seen about a 90% decline in those numbers. And then in Chesapeake Bay, they're seeing a lot of nest failures. And a researcher, Michael Academia, and others believe that this is probably tied to overfishing. So we just don't know very much about our osprey here in Humboldt Bay. And we're trying to put our heads together to think about what might be the reasons where we saw such low nest success last year. In other places, there might be limited nest structures. That's probably not a worry here because we have so many nest platforms in Humboldt Bay specifically, as well as lots of trees and snags. But other people have looked at specifically competition with things like bald eagles. In Humboldt Bay, we had several of our nests taken over by double-crested cormorants, and western gulls. But those numbers of those species could be shifting. Prey availability, like the Chesapeake Bay research, might be a factor. There could be other things with contaminants, et cetera, that we don't know yet. So all of this has led me to wonder, how is our osprey population doing at a more regional scale? And so thus we've put our heads together to form the Northern California Osprey Collaborative, which seeks to establish a collaborative monitoring network to assess the status and trends of breeding osprey across Northern California. And that's where a lot of you come in, but we're working to expand our research across a lot of Northern California. These are all places that are near and dear to my heart, where I come down to the Mendocino coast to recreate regularly. Lots of wonderful reservoirs. This is a snapshot from a couple weeks ago, and already this is from today. We have many more records, both in part from myself and my intern working hard, but many members of the public helping. So I'm really, really, really just so honored and grateful for people willing to help. And I am also here to see if you guys are willing to help too. So like I said, we're expanding our research beyond Humboldt Bay, especially across different habitats. So Humboldt Bay is an estuary. We're looking at similar coastal habitats here in Mendocino, but there's so many rivers, reservoirs, lakes. And really, like I've said before, there's very little research that have been done on osprey across Northern California, except for there's some amazing scientists. Tony Brake is based in the San Francisco Bay Area and has been studying his osprey breeding there for about the last decade. And then I'm collaborating with Dan Arola, who's monitoring his osprey in the Sacramento area. So trying to learn from as many people as possible about what osprey are doing and how we can help them, hopefully. So like I said, you all know this, there's so much osprey habitat here in Northern California. Similarly, in terms of our research, we have a lot of interest in different, more specific topics. And so we installed several nest cameras to look at their diet and looking at that competition. We're taking genetic samples to look at how related our birds are, and even comparing that to the Idaho population, and even looking at things like ectoparasites. So the birds we banded last year had fleas on them, and I've been reaching out to osprey researchers across the US trying to see if anyone else has ever seen this, but it doesn't seem like it. So that might be a novel situation. But I wanted to share a couple of highlights. So this is a view into one of our Humboldt Bay nests. And I have a couple of students helping to sort through these photos. And then we're trying to figure out what species of fish these are. And also thanks to Ian here in the front, because he's a stellar fish biologist and biologist of many talents, and he has helped too. So I'm always eager for people to help with fish ID, because even though I took ichthyology, it was more than a dozen years ago, and I'm pretty rusty. So there's more updates and like fish quizzes on our Instagram if you want to follow along. But we're able to look at all sorts of really entertaining behavior. And just really enjoying that. And there's been some really wonderful excitement. This was the day we found out the first egg was laid. And so this brings me a lot of joy, and I'm happy to share it with other people via social media in these presentations. We have eggs at most of our nests. We put the nest cameras in over the winter, so they didn't come back to all of the nests. Some of them built a nest on the nearest pole nearby to sort of shake their fists at me, I guess. But most of them have about 3 eggs. And there's been all sorts of types of fish. I saw a lamprey we brought in yesterday. So it'll be really interesting to see like the breadth of what they're eating and try to understand where they're getting their food. And more fish, them, yeah, hungry parents. Like, what is this one? Yeah. So it's nice when their heads are on, but they also eat the head first, and it can make the fish idea even more difficult. That wasn't a salmon, or was a salmon? That was a salmon? Ah, see? All right. It's exciting. Um, there's been, oh yeah. Um, hopefully it's not too loud for you guys. I love that sound of osprey, but now you know what they sound like, so hopefully that wasn't too noisy. I'm glad that the audio worked on that one. Um, but this is also sort of a good transition to talk about how you all, as wonderful naturalists, locals, birders, can help. So this is just a map of Mendocino County. And there is so many different river systems and broad, like, I don't know how many miles of coastal areas, but I'm sure you guys have a lot of osprey. I've been checking as I can and really appreciate Sarah has shared a bunch of records. Other people are starting to share records. You all have places you frequent on the trails, etc. So I'd love to hear if you know of ospreys. And sort of more inland, the nearest reservoir is Lake Mendocino. I haven't found any osprey nests there, but I've only checked once briefly. I know of a bald eagle nest, and it's a smaller reservoir, so maybe they're the hot dogs, but the osprey were there. So the more eyes and ears, the better, because I'm just one person generally running around. So I am reaching out to folks like yourselves, but I also would appreciate if you know others in these places to spread the word. And while I have your attention, I also wanted to flag another collaborative community science effort to study peregrine falcons. And I'm collaborating with Dr. Zika Glucks at the UC Santa Cruz Predatory Bird Research Group. She and her team have been monitoring peregrines breeding around the San Francisco Bay Area for more than 50 years now. And that's almost entirely a community scientist-based research effort. And also the newly formed California Peregrine Project, they're trying to understand how peregrines are doing because Zika and her team have highlighted a really concerning results of avian influenza, which has a very high, only documented 100% mortality rate in peregrines. And she's the lead author on this recent paper about the rapid decline of nesting peregrines in the San Francisco area. And so these are her data. So on one side, in 2022, this is the breeding season before the arrival of highly pathogenic avian influenza, which came in the winter of 2022. So that's like maybe the baseline. And all of those black circles are occupied nesting territories, whereas in 2025, they have like severely less than that. So there's concern, and similarly to osprey, peregrines have not had a lot of research focus since their recovery. So I've been checking a bunch of historical territories in Humboldt. Y'all know of some nests. I know there's some on the headlands and a few other places I've briefly checked this year. But if you know of peregrine territories, you can also report those to the California Peregrine website, or if you just are reporting a nest to our website, we are sharing our data with them. And so we have a simple nest record form on our website, or I have a bunch of cards like I mentioned. You can email me a simple description, whatever is the most easy for you guys. It's really incredibly valuable data for us, and then we can go and follow up. Or we're welcoming volunteers. Shout out to Angela, who's willing to help with monitoring nests. So always happy to have people who are interested in going back to regularly check nests as well, sort of in a 2 to 4 week interval. And we can provide more training on that. But this is all a voluntary passion project. So if you want to donate and support our efforts, it goes a long way for paying for gas and field equipment. And especially for me, it's always really important to provide paid hands-on learning opportunities for other early career biologists. And so grateful that I got a small grant to hire my current summer intern, and I'm always just trying to take more and more people out to get the chance to get this hands-on learning. So in overview, there's a lot of ways that you can help if you're interested, and please help spread the word. If you are out there looking for nests, I did want to also set some reminders. You probably all know this, but please be attentive to bird behavior because the goal is to not bother them and, pretend you're a little detective, right? You don't want them to notice that you're there. So keep your distance. And if you notice them alarm calling, flushing, try to adjust your behavior to give them space because our goal is to not cause any disturbance to these birds. And also really prioritize your safety and your well-being. None of this data is worth anybody's risk. So just wanted to emphasize that as you're out there looking. But I am really grateful for the many people that support this effort, especially the Humboldt Bay Harbor District and PG&E, my mentors, Dr. Matt Johnson and Pete Bloom, and the many people who are supporting the research side, some of these other universities too. And yeah, loads and loads of people have been willing to share their time and insight. So before I conclude, let's see what else I have. I have a couple of other highlights to share with you. I think that the one, if I added it here, this is what I wanted you to see. So we now have this is from yesterday, so they're still growing, but yeah, amazing footage to look into the lives of these osprey. And I don't want to take any more of your time, but I'm happy to answer questions and hang around if people want to share their insight or yeah, and we can take questions from the Zoom too. So thank you so much for having me.
Is there a place that we can see like nests that are already being looked at?
It's a yes. Thank you, Mary. There was a question from the audience about is there a way for us to see where the nests are? If you commit to being a volunteer, yes. I don't have like a completely public map, but I'm sharing my maps with volunteers for different areas. So in terms of here in your local neighborhood, we know of at least, I think, 5 active nests on the Noyo Harbor here. Thanks to folks like Ian and Sarah and even Angela, a lot of people know about some of you can get some phenomenal views of nests right here at the boat launch. Okay, see, see, okay, that's exciting. I don't know. I haven't been to Ukiah. Somebody just told me that there are some nests in Ukiah at the Mendocino Redwood Company mill. I don't know if that's so. Yeah, so this is the first year of this broader effort, and so I'm like rapidly updating maps all the time. But we yeah, if you're interested in knowing where nests are, I'm happy to talk to you or share that maps so that you can have a sense of it. But I would assume basically that we don't know about most of the nests is a safe assumption. I would really at this stage like to hear about any nest observations that you might have. Yeah, great question. Lots of people. Maybe, yeah, sure. Let's go with Taylor first.
So what about the chip reader or something?
Yes, that's a great question. So the question was, because of them potentially eating a species like salmon, have we thought about bringing a pit tag scanner? Pit tags are often inserted into salmon for research purposes and scanning the nests. I have thought about it. I haven't done it yet, but I've had a couple of conversations with fisheries professors in the department at Cal Poly Humboldt, and maybe we could do that, especially I look around the base of the nest pretty regularly because you can collect like the otoliths and look at species and stuff like that. So I've done that, but I think that's a great idea. And so if I can just borrow a scanner, I think that's a great idea. I think that the blue, sorry, would you go next with your question? Yes, please.
Like the bald eagle grasses from the osprey.
Yep. So the comment was that you live on 10 Mile River and see both osprey and bald eagles breeding and see the bald eagles maybe stealing food from the osprey, right? So that's a very common observation. Bald eagles are what's called kleptoparasites, which means they steal if you want trivia terminology, the fancy scientific terms. And I see that all the time. I mean, I've seen even like osprey get severely injured because of the tussle that they go on. I think the bald eagles, they tend to win. They're so much bigger. But ospreys are, so far as we know, they're actually fishing, and bald eagles are a lot more like opportunistic and are scavengers too. So they're taking advantage of an easy meal if they can. But oh yeah, and they'll chase them down. Yeah, you get to see some really interesting behaviors if you're out there watching. Yeah. So I do think that the proximity, I would love to know, and I'm looking at historic records of bald eagles and checking for bald eagle territories, because I'm curious how far the bald eagles and osprey might be able to tolerate each other. So like super interesting if I mean, there's lots of habitat, but like they still interact. So that's something it's great that you're observing that, and it's something I'm really interested and curious about. I believe that. So there's another comment from the audience about ravens doing the same thing. Yeah. Uh,
Down at my tracks.
Whoa. There's another comment about watching a peregrine steal a fish from an osprey, but then eventually dropping it. Yeah, it's so interesting to hear these observations. And, we're, as scientists, like, we're limited by our time out in the field and much area. So I'm like Tim's message earlier about eBird is a phenomenal tool. I'm always checking eBird records. And iNaturalist is a tool. We just made a project in iNaturalist, but all of us, if we stay curious, we're seeing so many interesting things out there. And don't assume that we being the collective society knows about it. Like you could see something amazing. And I would really encourage all of you guys to share that, because these birds are wild and do strange things sometimes. So yeah. Other question? Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Hmm. So the question was whether I have seen drones used in proximity to osprey and if that's causing any problems. Really. I personally have not witnessed any direct use of drones in proximity to osprey, but I attend a number of different scientific conferences and have seen some recent presentations about people using drones for research purposes. And the technology on drones, Mike and I in the audience were having a conversation about drones for research. And I do know of people using drones for bird research across different species. And one of them is a friend who's an osprey researcher, Natasha Murphy. She did her PhD on osprey in Tennessee, and she actually tried to understand some of the disturbance distances specific to osprey. So people are doing more like thoughtful looking at how we can use drones without having an impact, ideally. And so there's more guidance, even like depending on where you're at. Really, with any drone, like you really have to know that you have specific permission of where you're at. I am not yet a research pilot. I'd really like to do that. So it's not my expertise, but I think it is a really exciting potential tool. And having seen a couple people use the drones, like in those presentations, they were hundreds and hundreds of feet away from the nest, but because they have such good cameras, they can zoom in and get to a height where they can look right into the nest, count the number of babies, do a survey in a much shorter amount of time. And yeah, in those presentations, not have an impact to the animals because they're even further than maybe a surveyor might be. So I'm personally excited about that potential technology, because there's so many places where it's really steep and I might not be able to see into the nest, and we do the best we can with spending more time and trying to make sure we see a baby lift its head. But I think that there's hope that, and a lot of people are trying to be really thoughtful about it. That's my impression, is to make sure that it's used carefully. And even Mike had a great suggestion in our brief conversation earlier about like surveying nests, or using drones when they're not nesting, so that you can even just find the nests. But so there's some more insight into it, but not me personally. Thanks. Other questions? Yeah, Marshall? Yes, Christy is. She's a friend and she's awesome. And she's been doing a lot of outreach. The first question of that was using historical records. Yes, well, the California Breeding Bird Atlas, which Tim gave an overview, and I'm happy to like just do a walkthrough. I was really lucky, and there's YouTube videos now of how to use the California Bird Atlas. It is kind of tricky, but it's totally surmountable. So if you haven't like seen any of those videos, Tim, the main lead, his name is Van. He did a great presentation about how to use it. We could probably have that maybe be a something. He is great. So there's stuff on YouTube if you guys want to try to tackle it yourself. But the California Bird Atlas just was launched this year, and so people are out there. I'm collecting data wherever I go. It is really exciting because so it's using eBird, but then asking people to provide a nesting code of like how likely the observations that they see of birds are for that species to be breeding there. And most people, most of us eBirders are just doing data as fast as we can and don't add those nesting codes. So there's not a lot of data that I have had to go through yet, but there's more and more, and I'm so excited. That's a 5-year project, and we're going to have a much better sense of the distribution of osprey because of that. But I'm checking eBird records like on a weekly basis and going to spots where a lot of records are reported. But anyways, that it's not a perfect system yet in that way, and a lot of people, maybe know of a nest, but it's not indicated in the nesting codes at all. So it's a really, really exciting time what they're doing, and I'm checking all sorts of historical data in terms of the breeding bird atlases. There's different databases through the state and Forest Service and the timber companies, like you name it. There's a lot of different data I've been sleuthing through to try to go back and check, particularly because the birds have a likelihood to be there over time. Yeah, up in the front. Yeah, the question is related to banding and what I was talking about not having to recapture the birds, of whether we can. So nestlings of all raptors provide a great opportunity for us to get our hands on them more easily. Adult raptors of many species are so smart. We do catch them, but sometimes it's a lot of effort and a lot of patience. You can catch adult osprey. It takes a lot more effort, and there's like, really the main way that I have been told is that you would try to catch them with a little, it's called a noose mat, but basically it's using fishing line over the babies. All of this also, like, I really want to emphasize, I have more than 10 years of banding experience. This is done with both federal and state permits, and I have not done adult osprey banding. People do it, and maybe one day I'll do it, but all of the work that we've done is done with extraordinary caution and care to be very attentive to bird health and well-being. We're trying to learn what we can about these birds, but like, because we want to conserve and help them. So we do it efficiently and carefully. So catching adult ospreys is very difficult. Not impossible, but difficult. So and then by banding a baby, we can then see, okay, we know where this bird was hatched, and they're likely to come back to the same sort of neighborhood to build a nest of their own as adults. But we can know how far they go, and yeah, it's just a great tool, like I said earlier. Other questions? Yeah, in the back. Awesome. Yeah, I would love to know about that nest. And really anywhere across Northern California, I've had people submit records elsewhere, like the line of where we call Northern California is not set, so it doesn't matter to me, right? I would love to know about nests anywhere, and I just really, I want to spread awareness about how awesome osprey are, and nobody has been keeping records of them in most cases. So yeah, happy to hear about any records. And I'm sharing my data with if there's particular landowners like the Forest Service and state parks and timber companies. So happy to be the relayer. Sarah. Oh, cool. Oh, awesome. Okay. You did mention it to me. Yeah. It's so amazing. Yeah. All of you guys probably know so much about your neighborhood osprey, and I would love to have that insight. Yeah. Yes, Tim? Yeah, I think that the records are in the 20 to 30 ballpark. I should double check that. I've definitely seen 20, and we can learn more about that based on those bands. But they're way longer lived than I think most of us realize. Like, and just remarkable that they can migrate and come back and keep doing all this rugged life that an osprey has. Yeah, a lot of these raptors live way longer than I first initially thought. Yeah, sorry, I didn't repeat your question, but lifespan is quite long. Another question, Sarah? Um, Thanks. Yeah, the question is about migratory versus resident observations, and it sounds like here in Mendocino you've had some that you thought were spending the whole year here. I have thought about that, and it's definitely a goal to do more research on that way, and that's something that with bands and also potentially doing something like any sort of transmitter work to really verify where birds are moving. There's thought in Clear Lake that some of those birds might spend the whole year there. So I have played around with eBird, and you can look at the time of year that observations are input, and there's some places where it's really clear, like you only see records, say, in the summertime for osprey in Humboldt, and then you look in December, and maybe there's one or two that are seen every once in a while. But in places like Clear Lake, there are more winter observations. So I do think it's curious, and just briefly thinking about it, I mean, can they fish? What are the conditions? If they're fishing more in a reservoir, maybe it's still easy to see fish versus like stormy weathers on the coast might be a reason that you would migrate to better places. I mean, in general, when we think about why birds migrate, it usually is tied to food availability. So I would love to know more. So it's another reminder to share your records, however that be, and eBird is a great tool for that. Yes, Marshall? Yeah, sorry. We got that question from Tim, and I don't know the exact, but I know that I've seen 20 years, and I think it's probably upwards of that. Yeah. Yeah, Pam?
With this other, like the cormorants and the birds coming from, putting down to get fish and
Mm.
that.
Not with that specifically, but I love the way that you're thinking. So the question was whether the ways that osprey dive might compete differently with the ways that cormorant fish. I have read somewhere that ospreys tend to fish only within the first like 2 meters, so the first 10 feet of or 6 feet of the surface. Uh, but I mean, I would assume that they can definitely fish further than that, but that might be a limitation that they're more, ospreys may be fishing more in shallower waters than other birds. I mean, cormorants can probably, like, they're able to swim, right? So that, like, in terms of what habitat is available to them, but I see ospreys on the ocean, and so I they're utilizing a whole bunch of different types of habitat. And I mean, that's one of the aspects that I think is so amazing and remarkable that they're adaptable to that. But yeah, I mean, it'd be a lot of observation. I don't know how you get at like that level of detail of how deep but maybe someday. Yes, please.
It swam large fish through the rock and got on the rock with the large fish and fly with them. and proceeded to die.
Wow.
Whoa. So for the Zoom folks, there's a member in the audience who observed an osprey fishing. What was the island? Roatan. And catching too big of a fish to actually fly with, and it swam through the water till it could get to a rock. See, this is like absolutely another example of wow, such cool things. Like, I mean, cameras are great potential document this kind of stuff. These are natural history notes that could be written up that you can add it to eBird. I mean, so interesting. So was it swimming with its wings? I believe you. I mean, yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, I see them sometimes like barely able to take off at the water's surface, and like just really struggling under the weight of the fish. So yeah, um, I we'll take one more question, and then you guys can come talk to me too. Um, there's a lot of research that has been done on Osprey there, and I don't know if they're using community scientists. I should ask because I do talk to them, and they've been really helpful about like sharing some of their like thoughts about Nest platforms when I was and cameras when I was doing some of that work. So it's not that I know of, but I think I've been part of a lot of community science projects. They are so fun, and I think it's like Ospreys are just a great opportunity for community members to help monitor. So, um, yeah. One more question from Mary here. She asked, how long does it take for the babies to fledge? In general, it's around 55 days, which is quite long because they're a pretty big raptor for them to grow up. And then even after that, they're kind of branching out a little bit more, and the parents definitely still feed them for a while. So yeah. I want to be respectful of people's time. I can hang out as long as people want to come talk to me, but is that all the questions on Zoom too? Thank you to our media team in the back, Marshall and folks. And thank you again to the Mendocino Coast for hosting, and I'll stick around and happy to talk to people. Thanks.